Fast-paced, run-and-gun shooting, handheld, up in the mountains, down in a studio, doesn't matter, and I don't think I can go to anything else, dude. Like, this is sick. I've shot everything from Nikon, Sony, Canon. Sony's kind of been king for a while, but Lumix kind of taken Sony's spot in a lot of places. I'm gonna detail 3 reasons why Lumix is coming out on top. Number 1 is the ease of use. I've never had a camera that works as seamlessly as this camera does to get good footage every time. And that comes down to a number of things. 1 is monitoring. There's so many easy features in here that allow you to monitor. When I'm shooting vlog, it allows me to import LUTs so that I know what my end product is gonna look like. This is incredibly useful when you're trying to expose and get the right colors, right exposure in a number of environments. 2nd is shutter angle. It sounds small, but it's actually huge, especially when you're jumping between different frame rates consistently. I shoot everything from 24 frames per second, 30 frames per second, upwards of 48 and 60 frames per second for a variety of different reasons. Being able to transition between these different frame rates without having to calculate the exact shutter speed for 180-degree shutter angle, sometimes I'm shooting 90 or 45-degree shutter angle, without having to know this directly and being able to just transition immediately for what I want to get, it saves up so much time and computing power. It allows me to just focus on getting good video. I can't overstate how useful this is. This sounds small, but it's actually huge when practicing the field. Menu organization on Lumix cameras is incredibly streamlined relative to Sony, Canon, a few others that I've actually used. Everything is where it needs to be, where it should be, translating to a more streamlined workflow. 2nd reason why Lumix is coming out on top. Panasonic's color science is insane. Now, it's true Lumix uses sensors built by Sony. Basically the same sensors you find in Sony, you find in Lumix cameras. The only difference is how Panasonic interprets this footage. Personally and subjectively, I feel like it is the most true to real life, and it's almost entirely changed the way that I color grade footage. I used to very much enjoy kind of a dull, washed out look. I've found that this correlated with my shooting with Sony cameras for a long period of time. And there are some little quirks, you know, with Panasonic's color representation, primarily in kind of the magenta aspect. In a lot of cases, this makes skin tones look really nice when replicated. But it goes beyond this. Most colors seem much more true to the real world than a lot of other camera sensors I've found myself shooting on. Panasonic Vlog is incredible. It doesn't matter whether you're shooting 420, 422, 8-bit or 10-bit, so much fun to color grade with, and I've found myself getting just incredibly vibrant colors without ever needing to push saturation of any kind. If anything, I'm trying to pull surrounding colors down so I can emphasize one color more heavily. The other reason why Vlog on these cameras is insane is the dynamic range you can get out of these cameras. I think it's about 14 stops or so. Not enough people talk about how this is so incredibly useful. Typically when I'm shooting outdoors, I'm shooting in direct sunlight where I can expose and do my best to expose between harsh shadows and the brights that are blown out. And if I can expose in between them, I can actually get all the information between both in a lot of cases. Sometimes you have to make the decision between both if you want to really focus on some, but the ability to recover from highlights and incredible darks is insane shooting in Vlog with the dynamic range provided by Vlog by the likes of the S5 Mark II. It is so much fun to work with. The 3rd reason, and probably one of the biggest that most people outside of the Lumix community know of why Lumix has taken over, is their stabilization. Stabilization on Lumix cameras sounds like it's overblown, but those who shoot with these cameras regularly understand how much it is not. My only dispute is most people don't discuss why that's important enough. Most footage on these cameras shot wide angle looks like it's shot on a gimbal. I'm not going to cover all the variations of where stabilization is incredibly useful, but in my personal cases, what this means is I can get sharper footage at longer focal lengths and at slower shutter speeds. So if I'm shooting at a long focal length, 85mm or above, handheld, and I'm trying to get video at 24 frames per second, 48 frames per second, there's a maximum speed you want to be panning your camera at these longer focal lengths at a lower shutter speed like 24 frames per second, 30 frames per second. If you're panning too quick, you're going to get an incredible amount of blur, especially at fast moving objects. Now, without getting into specifics and talking about going into higher shutter speeds to sharpen your footage, stabilization provides a ton of assistance here where you can actually get much sharper footage at a lower frame rate than you'd otherwise expect to. Because all of the micro jitters you're getting in your hands, everything you typically induce into the footage to make it look more blurry than it needs to, the camera's getting rid of. And this is one of the biggest use cases I've found with the internal body stabilization. When I'm shooting with this camera, I'm usually shooting with it in a sash bag, and I'm not using any kind of tripod of any kind. I've shot everything from handheld interviews to long telephoto shots. I had a 70-200 before on this camera, ended up returning it and just going with a 24-70. I don't typically use the digital stabilization, I use that in post. I usually only use mechanical, and I use it in very situational cases. I think the autofocus on this camera has been talked about enough, but I'm gonna go ahead and put my 2 cents in. I've been shooting Sony for years, and the phase attack autofocus on this camera, in my experience, in my use case, is indistinguishably the same as Sony. On a few occasions, I was able to get shots with the autofocus in this camera that I was never able to get with a Sony A7 IV or a Sony A7S III. It's kind of crazy because Lumix, this being the first generation of the phase detect autofocus in Lumix cameras, you would think there would be a number of quirks. I've experienced nothing but streamlined use cases with the autofocus in this camera. I'm not going to go anything beyond that. I just want to touch on it because this is a big talking point for these cameras, and it has been since the release of this camera. This is the system I've arrived at for the kind of shooting I'm doing. Allows me to get good video, good audio in the most condensed package. Lumix S5 Mark II, small rig cage, Rode Video Micro, and Gobi ND filters. Either the 24-70 or the 16-28. My main workhorse is the Sigma 16-28 2.8. It's an incredible lens. I use it for probably 60% of all the shooting that I use. Very light, versatile, really great for pretty much all video applications. The second lens I use quite often is the 24-70. A lot of times I will take this lens and only this lens. It is like 3 times heavier than the 16-28, but being able to get that 70mm is so dope, especially when I'm up in the mountains. It just kind of sucks when I'm jumping off of them. The other two lenses I use frequently, the 85mm, this is a very light lens, and sometimes I'll bring the 16-28 and just the 85 because this is so light and it basically hits everything I want to hit. 24-70, I really only shoot at the 2 furthest ends on this lens, so it's where it can be kind of a pain. I'm usually using ND filters on all of them too, so I'm typically only shooting video. Actually, all of these lenses, I couldn't find anything that covered. These are just Gobi ND filters, super sick. I actually 3D printed all of my own lens or ND filter covers just to pop on, super simple. I think I got them in 82, 77, and 67, and these are just incredibly durable. Like, they're flexible, but they just pop right on, right off. And then a low profile Rode Micro mic mount. This just makes it so that your camera is not as bulky as it was. I can slide it in and out of a bag, super easy. The variable ND covers and the Rode Video Micro mount you can find on my store at projectnarwhal.com. It took me months to kind of refine down to this, and I don't think I can go to anything else, dude. Like, this is sick. This is all I ever need. Oh dang, this is 67 right here. Yeah, these are dope. You guys got any questions on the cameras? Happy to talk more camera gear, but I couldn't be more stoked bringing this kind of camera, this kind of equipment, and this gear into like the base jumping environment and being able to capture things that, God, I didn't even know were possible. Super sick. Yeah, that's it. See you guys in the next video.